On the morning of the 24th of June 1998, there was a knock at Kathleen Grundy's front door. It was early, the sun was just rising, but the fit and healthy 81-year-old wasn't overly concerned by the uninvited visitor. In fact, she was pleased to see him. Standing at the door with an air of authority was her doctor, someone she would call a friend. He was there to take a blood sample, and after a cup of tea and some friendly chat about how she was feeling and what she'd been up to, blood was taken and the doctor left. But within hours, Kathleen would be found dead. But before I reveal just how gruesome this twisted tale gets, if this sounds like something you'll enjoy, then stab that subscribe button, because we try to release stories just like this at least once a week. Kathleen's death was reported as old age, but after her daughter found out that her will had recently been changed, the finger was pointed firmly at Kathleen's visitor that day, her doctor, Harold Shipman, because it was him who is now the beneficiary of her will. And as the investigation began, it revealed a dark and gruesome diary of death and deceit that didn't just stop at Kathleen's door. It revealed hundreds of innocent victims, all had died at the hands of Dr. Death. Harold Frederick Shipman was the second of three children born in Nottingham in England on the 14th of January 1946 to working class parents who were devout Methodists. Shipman adored his mother Vera. He was never far from her side, and no doubt he was her favourite child. Early on in his life, he found a passion for sport, becoming an accomplished rugby player and excelling in long-distance running, even serving as vice-captain on the athletics team. His energy and drive to win pushed him to try and be the best, probably to make his mum proud. I even imagine he dreamt of forging a career in sport and reaching the top of his game. But devastated by the death of his mother to lung cancer when he was 17, his direction changed. Leading up to her demise, he would often see her riddled with pain as a cancer set in, crying out for it to stop, lashing out at those close to her. And so in the later stages of her illness, she would be given morphine at home by their local doctor. Shipman would watch from the end of her bed as the drug started to flow through her veins, rapidly giving her relief and easing her pain. And with the agony gone, his mother would once again become the woman he adored, returning him to a calm embrace of his family. It would be that feeling that would never leave him. After the untimely death of his mother, Shipman embarked on a career in medicine, and just 4 years after graduating from Leeds University in 1974, he took his first position as a general practitioner at a local medical centre in West Yorkshire. As he started to settle into everyday life within a practice, he developed a secret drug habit. Shipman started forging prescriptions for himself for pethidine, a type of painkiller that's just as addictive as other drugs like morphine. Being in a position of trust, he continued to indulge himself with the prescription drugs, slowly becoming more addicted to their effect, while still successfully keeping it a secret from his family and his work colleagues. Sneaking drugs whenever he could made him desperate for that next fix, and so it drove him to greater risks. The craving for the relief the tablets gave him, the escapism from his own thoughts led him to make mistakes, and eventually he was finally caught. After being fined only £600, he was forced to attend a drug rehabilitation clinic. And you would have thought after this major crime that would be the end of his career. But no, Shipman was able to make a fresh start in 1977 and continued working as a doctor throughout the 1980s, establishing himself as a respected member of the local community, acting as a caregiver, offering advice and, more importantly, prescribing drugs. Drugs that have the ability to ease pain, but in some circumstances, drugs that could kill. Over the next 20 years, Shipman signed nearly 500 death certificates, almost 3 times higher than any doctor in the area. Why didn't someone notice? One of those victims was 81-year-old Laura Kathleen Wagstaff. 30 minutes after Shipman made a surprise visit to her home, on leaving her house, he turned to her neighbour and said, and I quote, "I have been to see Mrs. Wagstaff, and she is dead." Later, speaking to her family, Shipman said that Mrs. Wagstaff had phoned the surgery, and on arriving at her home, she was grey and sweaty, and so he escorted her upstairs. He took her pulse, it was racing, so he phoned for an ambulance. But the truth of the matter was, Shipman never phoned for an ambulance. He didn't speak to anyone. In a trustworthy voice, he would have convinced Mrs. Wagstaff to have an injection, one that we now know would have contained a lethal dose of diamorphine. He would have sat with her, held her hand and watched as a deadly fluid pumped around her body. Minutes later, she would have started to lose control of her muscles, becoming weak and restless, and no doubt asked the respected family doctor if everything was okay. After a few more minutes, she would have experienced severe dizziness, moving her head round in circles trying to get her balance. Even after starting to hallucinate, Shipman would have continued to hold her hand, enjoying the panic and confusion. With her pupils dilated and in the final throes of death, her body would have started convulsing as it tried desperately to regain control of the deadly liquid that was invading her body, until finally her organs would have given up the battle. After her life faded away, Shipman would have continued to hold on as a cold form of death took over her whole body. And after basking over his conquest, he would have cleared away the tools of death, closed his bag, and left the house. And it wasn't just their lives that were being taken either. Shipman stole their possessions, wedding rings and other sentimental jewellery, most of which were later found in his home, kept as a macabre reminder of his killings. But he went further. To help furnish his lavish lifestyle, he turned to forging his victims' wills, leaving their entire estates and savings to him. And as none of his colleagues bothered to question his extreme record of deaths, and even though people quietly started to refer to him as Dr. Death, he was still able to continue robbing innocent people of their lives just because he could. After pressure from Kathleen Grundy's daughter, Angela, due to her suspicions that her mother's will had been forged by Shipman, the police exhumed Kathleen's body, and it was determined that she had indeed been given an overdose of diamorphine, which caused her death. Shipman was arrested on the 7th of September 1998 for the murder of Kathleen Grundy, and was during the trial he was also charged with the death of a further 14 elderly patients, dating back to 1995. His wife Primrose, who attended the hearing every day, always believed Shipman was innocent, but on the 31st of January 2000, after rising to his feet in court and with no sign of emotion or remorse, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. But that wasn't the end. The following month, it was revealed that the police were investigating a further 175 deaths, and it was finally concluded that Shipman had murdered at least 215 people, the youngest being a 47-year-old man. But the truth is, there was probably more, many, many more. Shipman had been in prison for nearly 4 years. 4 years of being trapped, 4 years of having his freedom taken away from him. But he still showed no emotion, no remorse for the hundreds of people he had murdered. And in his final selfish twist, Shipman, now aged 58, realised that if he died before turning 60, his wife would still get a £100,000 payout and an annual pension of 10 grand. So in the early hours of the 13th of January 2004, on the eve of his 58th birthday, Shipman climbed out of his hard metal prison bed, and as the dull light of January morning filled his cell, he quietly removed the bedsheet from the bed. After dragging it over to a window, he took one last look at the world he had lost, wrapped one end of the sheet through the bars, and tied the other tightly around his neck. Standing with his back against the cold, hard wall, he slowly lowered himself to his knees, and the sheet went taut. With a final push of his body forwards away from the wall, he dug deeply into his throat, forcing the blood to pulse violently around his head. Gasping for breath, unable to swallow or call out, and fighting the will to live, Shipman's body started convulsing. His body's need to live fought his will to die, and even with his hands instinctively trying to free his head, it was too late, and death took his lifeless body into the dark. We can only hope in those last few moments the many innocent people he watched die in front of him were in that cell, enjoying his suffering and fear that he must have felt before his heart finally stopped and his evil soul left the world. So what drove Harold Shipman to kill so many people? I mean, was it for the money? Or was he just obsessed and excited by watching a person's life drift away by the power of his hands? Or maybe drugging them with diamorphine was his some twisted way reliving his mother's death? Whatever reason, during his life, this trusted and respected member of the community was allowed to live out his fantasies without detection. And the fact that he got away with it for so long scares me, because if he is never caught over the death of Kathleen Grundy, how many more times would he have been able to sit holding the hand of an innocent person while he murdered them in plain sight? Hey everyone, thanks for watching our twisted tale, The Deadly Diary of Dr. Death. If you enjoyed it, then please stab that like button and please consider sharing it. If you really like what we do, then please subscribe. It will really help us out. Good night and stay safe.